Synopses. Let's be honest, writers don't like writing them, but they are a crucial skill you have to learn if you want to succeed as an author. If you want to pursue writing as a career, someday you will need to write a synopsis for a project. I see authors who are trying to get a literary agent sometimes say that they hate writing synopses so much they will deliberately avoid querying agents who ask for them. But newsflash, if you get a contract with a traditional publisher, they will ask you for a synopsis. I am a historical mystery author with a 2-book deal with a publisher, and when they needed to approve my sequel idea, you know what I had to give them? A synopsis. So if you are ready to finally conquer the dreaded synopsis, today's video is going to be sharing all of my tips to write a synopsis that is truly killer. If you're new here, hi, my name is Jackie. My debut historical mystery novel is coming out with an imprint of Penguin Random House in summer 2026. And here on my channel, I discuss writing, mystery books, and so much more. So if that sounds interesting to you, hit subscribe to join our community. My first tip about writing a killer synopsis is to aim for it being approximately 1 to 2 single-spaced pages in Microsoft Word. Some literary agents or editors might ask for a synopsis that is longer or shorter than that, but 1 to 2 pages is a great starting point, and you can easily make it a little bit more detailed or, hello Drizzle, a little bit more brief as needed. The second thing about writing a synopsis is that it should be filled with spoilers. And I think sometimes authors get confused about the differences between a query letter and a synopsis. A query letter is the pitch that you send to literary agents to try and get them to request your full manuscript, and the query letter should not have spoilers. The synopsis, however, should be a full spoiler plot summary detailing all the main plot points of your book from beginning to end. And yes, the synopsis should give away the ending. Now, a literary agent may not read the synopsis before they read your book, but it does help them know that your book does not go off the rails in the end. And sometimes literary agents say that when they're reading a manuscript and they're not sure whether they're going to continue or not, they look at the synopsis, and figuring out where the author is going with the story helps them decide if they want to continue or not. If you're pursuing traditional publishing, I highly recommend checking out the Bookends Literary Agency's YouTube channel, and this is something they talk about in their videos on synopses. Agents on that channel say that frequently, if they're really enjoying a submission, they will not read the synopsis at all. But if they're unsure or wondering the direction of the story, the synopsis helps them determine whether or not they want to continue. If, say, an agent reads your synopsis and your ending really intrigues them, they might read on. But if they look at your synopsis and it says, and at the end, aliens descended down and took over the Earth, but there was no hints of any aliens in the pages they read, then they may put your book down. So make sure to give full plot spoilers in your synopsis. The third thing you need to know about writing a synopsis is that it should be written in third-person present tense. It should summarize the key events of your novel in a way that is engaging but not too salesy. And one thing that you should never, ever do in your query letter or your synopsis is tell readers how they're going to feel. You don't want to talk yourself up and risk sounding arrogant or making promises that you may not be able to keep. If a scene is going to make readers laugh out loud or move them to tears, then you need to just let them get to that part and laugh out loud or be moved to tears. If you tell them that's what they're going to feel and then they don't have that reaction, you've set them up for disappointment. So an example of a bad line in a synopsis might be something like, Sally dies in Tom's arms in a scene that will move all readers to tears. In this sentence, you, the author, are talking your story up and making promises about the reaction the reader is going to have, and not all readers are going to be moved to tears by that point. If an agent gets to this scene and they don't cry, now you've made a false promise to them and you're setting them up for disappointment. Instead of framing events in your novel in terms of what the reader's reaction will be, describe them in the terms of how those events impact your main character. So here is a better example. Sally dies in Tom's arms, leaving him devastated. This is now making the story about the main character, Tom, and how this event changes him and propels the story forward. You are writing your synopsis focused on the protagonist's perspective instead of the reader's perspective. Tip number 4 for writing your synopsis is do not name minor characters or discuss unessential subplots. You want to keep the synopsis fairly tight so that it's not confusing for the person reading it. In a query letter, I would generally keep proper names to 2, possibly 3 maximum to limit reader confusion. In a synopsis, I think you can name more characters than that since this is a full spoiler document, but I would still limit character names to around 5, give or take. Because if you are mentioning the names of 10 different characters, some of whom only appear in one sentence in the synopsis, the reader is going to get name fatigue and start feeling confused about who all these people are and how many of them they actually need to remember to understand the plot. Ask yourself what characters are absolutely essential to the basic understanding of my story. And remember, you can reference characters in your synopsis without explicitly naming them. Let's again go back to this fictional synopsis dealing with Tom and see a good and bad example. A bad sentence in the synopsis would be, Tom decides to solve Sally's murder with the help of Joe, Steve, and Pam. We are mentioning a lot of character names in that sentence, and I have no idea who Joe, Steve, and Pam are. How important are they to this story? Do I need to remember them to understand what happens later? Instead, we could say something like, Tom decides to investigate Sally's murder with the help of a teenage computer hacker, a retired police detective, and Sally's devoted sister. We are again mentioning 3 minor characters who are going to be in the story, but we're not naming them. So the reader will not feel the same compulsion to remember those proper names. When you name a lot of people, it makes the reader think that those people are all going to be very important later, and so if that's not the case, they'll be confused. I also just think this is a genuinely better sentence because you are giving a little bit more detail and intrigue by describing the archetypes or roles in the story of these people, instead of just dropping 3 random names that may not circle back by the end of the synopsis. Another thing about character names comes in here with tip number 5, and that is to put character names in all caps when they first appear in the synopsis. Do not do this in a query letter. This is for the synopsis only. But the reason you want to put the names in all caps when they're first used is because it makes them stick out more and it makes it easier for the person reading your synopsis to remember the names. It increases readability, it helps the important parts of the synopsis stand out, but don't do this in the query letter. In the query letter, the only thing that should be in all caps is the title of your book and the titles of your comps. Tip number 6, people always get angry at this advice, but I stand by it. Tip number 6 is to focus on the plot, not the themes. When I go to Barnes & Noble, and I am looking for a new book to read, I am not looking for a book with certain themes. I am picking up the book, I am looking at the cover, I am looking at the summary, I'm looking at the first pages, and I'm trying to find something that sounds interesting to me, that sounds like it has a plot that's really gonna hook me in. Having a cohesive and engaging plot will naturally result in your work having themes, and it is the plot that your potential readers care about. That is what gets them to pick up books. And if you have written a well-written manuscript, once an agent or editor starts reading your book, the themes will naturally make themselves apparent due to the cohesive writing. So, if you're writing a synopsis, do not say something like, "My book explores the complicated nature of grief and the perils of seeking revenge." Instead, show those themes through your description of plot events. A better example would be something like, Tom holds Sally's killer at gunpoint, but ultimately decides not to pull the trigger, knowing that Sally would want him to move on with his life. Tip number 7 for writing your synopsis is to get to the point, but still weave in emotion. You do not want your synopsis to get too bogged down with very minute descriptions of everything that your character does. However, you still want the prose to be engaging, and you want the person who's reading your synopsis to be able to understand how your main character is feeling. You do not want it to be too bogged down, but you also don't want it to be too robotic either. Let's go back to our fictional synopsis and look at 2 examples of what would be bad writing. Here is an example that has way too much detail. After Sally's death, Tom spends many hours looking at photographs from his and Sally's wedding day while eating ice cream and sobbing over his lost love. When he talks to the police, they say that they don't think Sally's death is suspicious, and Tom yells at them, getting himself kicked out of the police station. He decides to find the killer himself. Too many details here. It is making the synopsis slow, and it is really going to make it hard to get that desired 1 to 2 page count. However, it would also be bad synopsis writing to say, Sally dies. Tom talks to the police. They don't believe him. Tom decides to find her killer. Tom follows clues. That is just very boring writing, and it really isn't giving any detail at all. It is just a very robotic, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. So a better way to write the synopsis would be in between these 2 examples. Here is an example of how you might write this instead. After Sally's death, a depressed Tom struggles to cope. When the police classify Sally's death as an accident, Tom decides the only way he can move on is by finding out who killed his wife and making them pay. In this example, we understand Tom's emotions. We understand what inspires him to act, and we understand what he is going to do next. It is fast-paced enough to keep the synopsis moving along, but still brings in some of Tom's emotions and motivations in the story. Tip number 8 for writing a compelling synopsis is to think about who your character is, what choices they make, and how their circumstances change by the end of the story. In a good novel, the protagonist is not someone who things merely happen to. The protagonist needs to have, dare I say it, agency and make active choices that drive the story forward. If your protagonist is not making any choices, but merely being pushed around the story like someone in a strong current, then they are going to come across as very passive, and that's going to make it harder for readers to root for your main character. So while writing your synopsis, really think about the things that your protagonist is doing and how they are changing their circumstances. If they aren't making choices, then that is an issue with your novel itself that you really need to address. In this way, writing a synopsis is a really helpful tool because it can help you identify potential issues with your manuscript itself. Your synopsis should by and large center on your main character's arc, and if your main character doesn't have an arc, then you may have to ask yourself if this person actually is the main character of your story. And a majority of the time, the choices your main character makes should result in them being a different person at the end of the story than they were at the beginning. If your main character starts the story in one place and then they end the story in the exact same place, the status quo remains in place, then it may make your reader feel like there was no point to the story they just read. And finally, tip number 9 for writing a killer book synopsis. This was a real game changer for me. I recommend reading the plot summaries of movies on Wikipedia. This, in my opinion, is one of the most helpful things you can do when you are writing a synopsis. Pull up one of your favorite movies, a movie that you know very, very well, on Wikipedia, and look at the section that says plot synopsis or plot summary. Read that and ask yourself, okay, what parts of the film were included in this synopsis and what parts were left out? You may notice that subplots from the movie were not included in the summary and that certain minor characters were not mentioned by name. You can also look at the language used and how the written synopsis describes the events of the plot quickly and succinctly. Do this over and over again with movies that you know well and really study these synopses so that you can use them as examples when you are writing your own. Do you have additional questions about how to write a killer synopsis for your book? If so, drop them in the comment section. And if you watched this video through to the finish, why don't you leave a cat emoji in the comment section? I am so thankful for the amazing community that we have built here, and if you want to join in on all the fun, please do hit that subscribe button. I post new videos every single week, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. That's a very valuable way that I can figure out what kind of content my audience is enjoying and finding helpful. If you want to watch another one of my videos, I recommend this one where I discuss how I outlined my novels. Thank you so much for being here today. I love and appreciate you all, and I will see you next week with another new video. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for watching.